Hi, everybody. It's Chris Coulter here with David Grayson and Mark Lee. Hey, David.
Hi, Chris.
And hi, Mark.
Hey, Chris. Great to see you.
I want to hear again, David. You didn't seem ready for that. Like, how's it going with you?
It's going very well, thank you.
Good.
The sun is shining. What more can we ask in January?
Perfect. That's wonderful. And we've got two friends joining us for this podcast, and they're both experiencing different types of weather in different parts of the world. And I'll introduce each. Mzila Mthenjane is the CEO of Minerals Council South Africa. Hi, Mzila. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Chris, and great to be here.
And where are you today?
I am in South Africa, in a province called KZN, KwaZulu-Natal. North of the city of Durban, and it's a beautiful, bright day. It's been clear blue skies the whole day, averaging about 23, 25 degrees Celsius. Let me be specific.
Excellent. That is great. And Rohitesh Dhawan is the CEO of ICMM. And Roh, you're in a different part of the world experiencing different climatic perspectives. What's happening?
I'm cold, Chris. I'm cold. I wish I was in KZN with Mzila, but I'm here in London, where it's been single digits since, October. But good news, Chris, is that sunshine is on its way. Not because London's about to get warmer, but I'm about to go to South Africa. And
mining in Davos. So the two of you will be together.
That's right.
In Cape Town, in sunny Cape Town, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, it is bloody cold here in Southern Ontario, negative 20 or 30, depending on the time of day. But it's a beautiful winter at the same time. Okay, so I'm so excited about this podcast because I've known you, Roh and Mzila, for many years, and we were together in Riyadh for the Future Minerals Forum and had some great conversations there. But we wanted to bring you in to understand more about this fascinating sector of mining, one that I think is often misunderstood for different reasons, but there are lots of lessons to be learned when we're thinking about sustainable development, and it's a hot thing right now. All of a sudden, mining is sexy with the critical mineral imperative. So love to get in and dig into that. Before we do, maybe we can hear a little bit about, your backgrounds and how you got to where you are. And maybe Mzila, we'll start with you.
Sure.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I guess I can start in terms of university, where I did mining engineering at Wits School of Mines in South Africa. And fortunately to have had a financial assistance, what we call a bursary from Anglo-American, what was then Anglo-American Gold and Uranium Division. The history of mining is beginning to fascinate me in South Africa because I think we're going through a phase where it could significantly put a lot of things into perspective.
And how old is mining in South Africa? What's the date?
So the Minerals Council is celebrating 135 years. And so the mining industry in its formal sense is just over, probably close to 140 if we take it back to the discovery of diamonds in Kimberley. So it's quite old. And then spent some time in gold mining for about 5 years, and then had an itch and really wanted to explore the money side of mining, so to speak, and then did some time in investment banking. And then I worked and exchanged between mining and investment banking with exposure to Deutsche Bank in South Africa, as well as Rand Merchant Bank in South Africa. And I worked for Gold Fields, as well as the Royal Bafokeng Nation, which was one of my prized times in my career, where I truly experienced a partnership between social capital and economic capital for the benefit of community. And that's where I developed my interest into the concept of sustainable development. And then after that, I joined Exxaro which is a coal mining company and continues to be a significant player in South Africa's energy complex, because it's actually looking at both coal mining as well as renewable, and now extending that into supporting the transition in terms of exploiting battery metals such as manganese as well as copper for purpose of electrification. And we'll also most likely be looking at aluminium for construction. So quite a diverse business. And then after 10 years at Exxaro, I needed a new challenge, and the opportunity at the Minerals Council came by, and Roger Baxter, my predecessor, was also ready to retire and explore something new. He's now actually chairman of a junior mining company that's looking at bringing a platinum mine on into operation in due course. So kind of switch roles. I've gone from, commerce into advocacy. He's gone from advocacy back into commerce.
Great. Well, we'll talk about which one's better later. But I also want to come back to you on your role at Exxaro, because you had a really interesting title that we've talked about before, and we can bring that in the conversation. But Ro, what's your windy road to here?
Do you know the really interesting thing is, Chris, we've just heard why Mzila is imminently qualified to do the role he does. Let me now tell you why I am entirely unqualified to do the role that I do. Entirely unqualified.
You fake it till you make it.
I'm still faking it. I say this half in jest and half seriously, Chris, because honestly, my role is the head of the global body for the mining industry. International Council on Mining and Metals brings together 26 of the world's largest metals and mining companies in the world. We have between us over 650 mines in over 50 countries. We represent somewhere between a third and half of global production of mining. So this really is the kind of global home, and something we're very proud of, not just the home of mining, but the home of responsible mining. We'll get into how we define that and why we can claim that. But Chris, somebody in that role to not be from the mining industry, I think is a big statement. And I'm not from the mining industry. I love the industry, and I've worked in and around the industry my entire career as a management consultant. But I'm the furthest thing from a dyed-in-the-wool miner, and I've never said this before to anybody. But you, Chris, have the habit of bringing things out of people in this way. Is that for the 5 years I've been doing this job, I've actually hidden that fact away. I've not wanted to explain to people that I'm not from this industry. I've tried to dial up the parts of my career that show that, I know mining. Like I'm not this weirdo who doesn't. And in there lies something really interesting for me, which is that I think our industry is not that dissimilar to others, where we have a habit of valuing those who have followed the traditional path, and we can put quite neatly into a box and say, this is your experience and this is how it relates to us. Every industry has that inertia in it. But I think the place that mining finds itself in now, and we'll talk about why this industry is at a truly historic moment right now, means that more outside-in perspectives are probably more valuable now than they ever have been. And I certainly haven't found it as easy to own up to the fact that I'm not from the sector, but yet feel deeply passionate about it and have things to contribute. Last thing I'd just say, Chris, is that if you asked me what is in my bones, my identity, what do I care deeply about, both because of my training, but also because of my passion, I am proudly somebody in the sustainability movement. So that's what I studied. I have a master's in environmental change and management, and before that, an undergraduate in economics. And a lot of people ask me, well, if you're such a pro-sustainability person, why mining? Why would you work in that industry of all? And for reasons I will come to later, Chris, is that to me, it is the industry that has the potential to have the greatest impact on almost every sustainability indicator we care about, whether that's environmental or social. Mining done right, wow, it is such a powerful enabler of sustainable development. And let's be clear, done wrong, it's also a massive detriment on all the things we care about. But that's why I'm here. I cannot think of another sector through which I could have a bigger impact on the things I care about than mining.
Yeah.
That's a great big statement. Go ahead, Mzila. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point where Rose started, and it just made me recall the decisions that I took to build my own career. And I think, Ro, you in this role, perhaps less about your mining qualifications, but I think what is increasingly becoming a very important trait of leadership, and that is the courage, and the courage to take on change, to be bold enough to do things that have never been done before. And so back in 1990, well, I think it was 96 when I actually wanted to move out of mining into investment banking. And I was politely told to stay where I am because I was still wet behind the ears. I didn't know anything about mining as yet, and it was too early to leave. And I guess then on started the courage to actually take on the advice and follow it through. And I've never regretted that. This was probably the best advice I got. The appreciation to actually learn and build fundamental skills is quite important to building a successful career. And then actually exploring what else you can do to complement that underlying mining engineering degree in terms of investment banking. And I think just like yourself, then stumbling into the area of sustainability through a master's program that today I have never completed. And the reason being that we were told that, a master's is not about trying to change the world. At which point I responded to myself, well, what's the point of doing this?
Get on to things that could change the world.
Yeah, exactly. But nevertheless, what I learned from it and what I subsequently got to practice is really what then I think refined my knowledge and experience. And combined with mining and finance, I think built a different career path. And I often get a lot of people asking, how did a mining engineer end up in sustainability? And maybe to Ro's point, how could a mining engineer not end up in sustainability? And I think I agree with Ro that, and I'm coming to believe more and more that mining is going to be the platform of future innovations going forward. It's an industry which I think, unfortunately, when you do compare it to any one of the Magnificent Seven, appears small, but its impact is significant. And it's something that we probably need to just appreciate that rather than constantly trying to compare ourselves to other industries.
Chris, I'm itching to jump in here.
Jump, David, please.
Because Ro, you made a very bold statement about the industry with the potential to have the most impact on so many different sustainability indicators and the reverse. And Mzila saying this is huge potential in terms of the innovation in the industry. So maybe we can just start to unpick some of these bold claims a bit for our viewers and listeners.
Only David could have framed that so politely, Ro. What he wants to know is, can you back that up?
Exactly. Okay, good. Let's take two issues.
That's the Californian the translation.
Translation. Yeah, exactly. Very diplomatic, David. Okay, so let's take two issues. Number one, on the social side, the industry, let's take a country like Australia. The industry pays more tax in Australia than every other sector combined. So you total up the tax paid by every other sector besides mining. Mining pays more than that. That tells me that it is generating a level of national wealth using the God-given resources underground that no other industry can match, because the scale is just of another level. But this is where it gets interesting, David, because that alone does not guarantee that the industry is part of sustainable social and economic development. Because yes, that money is being generated, but how that money is then utilized and how it is impacting people on the ground is where the rubber hits the road. Now, there's two schools of thought here, David. One could say, well, that's not our problem, is it? We hand the money over to the state. It's the state that decides what happens with it. Our job is done. Another school of thought says, given the size of us as an economic actor and the influence we have, were we to not lean in to more responsible management of those resources, we'll be failing in our duty to be actual responsible corporate stewards. So there's the double-edged sword about the impact we can have, but there's no denying that you would not be able to generate anywhere close to the kind of national wealth you can through mining. That's example one. Example two, more contentious, more interesting, nature. Now, I often love to do this exercise and ask people, and our viewers and listeners can think of it in their own head, what proportion of the world's land do you think is directly impacted by mining? In other words, if you total up all the world's land, and the holes in the ground that we dig to get the metals and minerals out, how much of the land would that cover? Now, as a point of reference, agriculture is around 50%. So around half of the world's land is touched by farming. The answer for mining is 0.05%. So by directly impacting 0.05% of the world's land, we're able to supply the metals and minerals that make all modern life possible, without which just life wouldn't be possible. Now, again, two ways of viewing that. Well, on the one hand, you might say, oh, well, that's really tiny. We don't need to care. Mining's impact on nature is small. Actually, that isn't the way I think we should be thinking about it. The way we should be thinking about it is, number one, yes, that may be your direct impact, but what about the indirect impact? You create a new road to a mine and suddenly that leads to illegal logging and deforestation. You got to think about that. And the places where rocks are found, for the, to be very, very crude about it, are also the same places where some of the richest biodiversity in the world is found. So, yeah, fair enough, it's only a small portion of the world's land, but if the portion that we end up hurting is some of the most rich and precious biodiversity, that's not a good outcome either. But yet, when you do mining well, you can make sure that nature is no worse off as a result of mining than had you not shown up in the first place on a net basis. And that's the commitment that companies on ICMM have made. So, David, the reason I said that is because both on nature and on social and economic value, the potential is enormous because of the scale at which we operate. In reality, though, we don't always get it right.
Mm-hmm. No, and sorry, I want to comment. I want to comment it in support of what Roy is saying in a different way. One of the things I found myself thinking about is how, in various platforms, including the ICMM forum, we've debated the issue of the mining industry's reputation. We compare ourselves to various other sectors, and we come out of those surveys pretty disillusioned that we are least favored by society because we don't compare well to.
Don't shoot the messenger, Mzila. Don't shoot the messenger.
No, not at all. I'm not. And I've been thinking that why do we do that to ourselves? And then I said, if I were to take time and imagine a life in the day of a commodity, and how commodities generally tend to be treated, I mean, we probably would rank low anyway. We commoditize, we mine commodities, and say, well, what's wrong with that? And actually embrace it. And in embracing it, I think what then became clear in my mind is that what we actually then will be left with, and what we'll be left in doing very well, is actually doing mining very well. And that then talks to Rohitesh's point around the whole approach to sustainable development. I think that's what we need to focus on. Secondly, I think we need to focus on fewer metrics, because I think that we get thrown too many metrics for performance. We get compared with many other industries. And I think we should focus on those few metrics that actually matter to the mining industry in terms of its own sustainability for the life of the operation, but I think also in terms of the impact that it can have on immediate communities, because to a large extent, the criticism leveled at the mining industry is due to its localized impact. And what Roy is saying, even on a cumulative basis, it looks like it's quite small, but it's no reason not to do anything. At a local level, that's where the people live. That's where you find biodiversity, and that's where you can have the most impact. And I think for me, that really crystallized the importance of sustainable development practices for mining, but fewer metrics of performance and doing them well, because when we do them well, we actually do them properly, and we really can make a big difference. And even if it's across the three dimensions of economic, environment, or social, or the five capitals, depending on how you want to define it. A few metrics within that, I think, can, and strategically selected, can make a significant and sustainable impact.
So I get the significance, particularly for particular national economies like Australia. I get, of course, the fundamental requirements for what mining industry produces for the global economy, for global society. So what does doing mining well actually represent for you both? What would be some of the key indicators if I'm in government for instance, having to vet a planning application from a mining company that wants to develop a major new mine project in my territory, what would be the kind of decisions that I should be looking for in terms of the commitments from that mining company to say whether this is going to be a neighbor of choice or is going to be a really damaging, dangerous intruder?
Do we have a California translation for that, Mark?
I think that one was clear.
Okay, good.
Well, I think if I can hazard a response, I would say first and foremost is how, in its consideration for developing the mine, it has taken into account the context which just at the mine. Because it is not a case of just targeting the ore body, extracting as much as it can, and then leaving, the environment, and environment, not just natural environment, but in its totality, in a distressed state. And within that, how it will then interact, how the mining operation will interact with some key aspects of that context. And I mean, I think if you want to start from a social perspective, it will be employment, skills development, training of people. And there will be some nuanced issues. We have issues of, inclusion, such as women participation, youth. So understanding the social context and how it will interact with that. And similarly, what it can do on the environmental side. I think the economic impact will also be important, particularly in terms of how that will drive, social progress in that region. The national impact on the economy will then be the outcome of a well-functioning operation. At the end of the day, the manner in which this operation will interact with its surroundings in a manner that is harmonious. I think if I were to be in the role of minister assessing such an application, that is the kind of conversation I would certainly have with the CEOs and the promoters of that business. And then on an ongoing basis, then how is that conversation manifesting in the actual operation of the mine?
David, it's such a beautiful question. And I would give 2 or 3 examples of where I think this is happening in practice. But please be assured that I'm not pretending like this is industry standard, because there is a long way to go for that in the baseline. But give you one example. Anglo American is a mining company that's committed to creating 5 jobs off-site for every job they create on-site. I think it's such a wonderful goal because it speaks to what Mzila is saying. Yes, mines will create jobs. Everyone knows that. But the point is, are you creating entire economies that will sustain far beyond the mine? And so by saying that you're going to create 5 off-site for every 1 on-site, you are showing yourself to be committed to the long-term prosperity of the places in which you mine. I think that's really positive. Another interesting number is 1 to 11. That's the ratio that a company like Vale, the Brazilian mining company, has set for itself as the hectares of land that they will protect, conserve, or restore for every hectare that they disturb. So they're saying, of course, we're going to disturb land because we need it to mine. But for every hectare that we disturb, we will protect, conserve, or restore 11 hectares of land as a result of doing that. That's wonderful because, again, you can't get away from the direct impact we have on nature, but you can make sure that overall our impact on nature is net positive, which is what Vale in this case, I think, is able to achieve. And the final thing I would say is a company like Antofagasta, which is a Chilean miner that uses only renewable energy for their operations. So 100% renewable energy for operations. That's really encouraging because people think of mines as these giant industrial operations, which of course they are. So if we can demonstrate that we can be 100% renewable, it really does show how we're accelerating the deployment of zero-emission technologies into the grid. And by the way, the same is happening on water. So again, a company like Antofagasta had many of their mines using 100% desalinated water. So important in a country like Chile, which is water-stressed. So therefore, you're not having an impact on continental water. And just so people get a sense of scale we're talking about here, this is not Antofagasta's number. This is a different Chilean miner called Codelco, which is a state-owned mining company. They consume 5,000 liters of water per second. 5,000 liters of water per second. So when an industry that is that water intensive switches to more sustainable sources of water like desal, which has its own challenges, let's be clear, but certainly far better than using continental water. That, to me, David, is the sign of responsible mining in action.
There's a very important point, Ro, that you're making with the examples that you're giving, and it's something that I find doesn't often come forward in our discussions, and that this is the consistent and constant trade-offs that we have to make, and that making trade-offs is actually a very legitimate and valid instrument in conducting mining, because we appreciate the impact that we have on our surroundings, but we don't abandon the consequences. And so importantly, I think we perhaps need to demonstrate more and be able to communicate and articulate the trade-offs that we're consistently making in order to just maintain, or at least even do better than what we would have, if to demonstrate that we can actually do better than what would have resulted from the operation if we did nothing.
I'd love to ask a question that kind of builds, I think, on what I'd characterize as a conversation about current impacts and current practices in some ways, many ways. And we know, right, this is a high impact industry in good and bad ways. To the examples that have been given, it can be done well, it can create jobs, it can create wealth, it can restore nature, and it can have tremendous negative impacts if done poorly. But we're also in a moment with mining where we need so much more of it, right? That the industry needs to scale. And I hear as an outsider the numbers about needing, as much copper as we've ever produced, again in the next decade or so. How do we reach these tremendous numbers of scale in a moment where the industry still has a perception of being high risk, and where the finances can be tricky, right? The costs of new development are quite immense, and the payoff periods can be really long. So investors just might have other places they'd rather go first. And yet, as a more member of society than anything else, thinking we need to scale this industry, we need to do so well, replicating the best practices that the two of you are endorsing and giving us examples of, and we need to do it at tremendous more scale. How are we getting there? How's the industry making that move?
It was difficulty.
And to do it in a way that maintains that social license to allow to do it, right? That's the other trick, of course.
Yeah. I think my observation is that there are a lot more conversations and connections taking place with other stakeholders who have to be involved with this. So some of the elements that Mark has mentioned are in the hands of different stakeholders. The big issue, in fact, interestingly right now when it comes to, closing the gap with supply chain is permitting. And why that is an important issue is because we know how long it takes to permit, how long it takes to just explore, especially for the size of operations that would like to see operating to supply these minerals.
And what's the average length of permitting, Mzila, in South Africa or globally? What's the?
I mean, a minimum of 5 years, and that's just for the exploration right. And then you have to convert that into a mining right. I mean, there are necessary stage gates in terms of, having to do a concept study, a pre-feasibility study. And the bigger the project and the perceived level of risk, the longer it will take because, the board wants to be certain, management wants to be certain about it. And then depending on the geology and the type of mine you're gonna exploit, it takes long to develop as well. If it's going to be a deep underground level, if you count the times from the time that you thought about the mine to the time that you actually produce the first mineral, it can be anywhere in 20 to 25 years. And then the mine obviously will continue to operate thereafter for another 30 years. So what I'm seeing is that, and there's as operators, we need to be engaging government in terms of how they change policy in order to shorten the decision time towards permitting and some of the policy decisions that are required. We also increasingly need to engage with the communities where those operations are going to be located because they have expectations and at times they have conditions. one of the biggest areas of nervousness for mining is FPEC. To the extent that C stands for consent and not consultation, it means that nothing will happen until the consent is received. And depending on the culture where the mine is going to be located, if it's if it's communities that are aggressive, and not engaging, and just pursuing their own interests outside of the context of government, it can be a big challenge. And these three parties then need to, engage and agree on a compact of how this operation is going to be conducted. You can't do much with the geology. So you have to work with what God has given you. But if you can reduce the time to first mineral by 5 years, that has a huge impact on the return on investment of that investor. And I think to the extent that this social compact reduces the non-market risks, I think that will provide for a significant shift in sentiment towards investing in mining. And it's just a concept that in my engaging as well, I'm beginning to build a thesis around how do we ensure that as a country we actually reduce and manage the non-market risk, because investors can manage the market risk. We don't have to worry about price. That's a commodity, that's a market decision. And then I think more importantly, the other aspects we were talking about in terms of being able to demonstrate that we'll be able to give returns to the social and environmental capital.
I think it would be helpful for our viewers and listeners if we could just explore this idea a little bit more of this free, prior and informed consent, and particularly, what do you do when you have a local community which isn't really engaging and isn't participating in the process actively to speed up that and save that 5 years that you were talking about, Mzila?
Well, it's not impossible to get to a point where you do get constructive engagement with a community like that. It's really just taking the time to listen. And this is where, as an operator, you would have to reprioritize the urgency of getting the project going to establishing a working relationship with local community. The second point is that I think you probably may need to bring in other players, other stakeholders to assist, and particularly local government or government in whatever form, to intervene and to play mediator. Just to give you a chance to be able to take a step back in that discussion and engagement with community. But there has to be an intention on the part of the mine developer to want to work with the community. And so I think position yourself for constructive engagement. And I think that consent will come. It may not come at a time that you want it, but I think an intention to engage with integrity and transparency is an important starting point.
And I'd love to hear your perspective, Ro, on Mark's question. But I think that is one of the things that I see from the mining industry that can teach other industries of this intention and commitment to real dialogue. It doesn't always go smoothly or easily or quickly.
It never does.
But I think through the scars and bruises over the years, the industry has understood, one stakeholder can make a difference, and so dialogue is very important. Go ahead, Ro.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, just joining the two questions of Mark and David, let's take a live example of something like copper, which is used in everything electrical, and we know that in the future more things will be electrified. The world produces in the region of about 23 million tons of copper a year. We consume about 26 or 27. That number is going to double in the next 30 years. So how we scale up is extremely challenging because we've never scaled up at this pace before. A large copper mine is in the region of around 300,000 tons of copper a year. That just to give people a sense of scale. Now, currently in the world's #1 producing country of copper, which is Chile, you would be mining an average grade of 0.5%. What I mean by that is to get half a ton of copper, you're going to be moving 100 tons of rock. And so if we as an industry don't find a better way of mining than what we've always done in the past, we will end up generating so much extra waste rock and therefore so much extra disturbance to land that it will make both our business economically more challenging and, as Mzila is saying, socially a lot less acceptable. And so I sometimes like to describe this as how heart surgery used to be done in the 1960s and 70s, where if you needed heart surgery, you would have to go and cut your whole chest open, operate on your heart, sew it back up, and leave a giant scar on your body. Today, you don't need to do that. You can do telescopic heart surgery through a pinhole. And we haven't achieved the pinhole version of mining yet. And that's where energy, capital, enthusiasm, and the brightest minds should be focusing, is how can we get all this copper out, which is in really small concentrations, without having to create this huge crater on the earth? Because if we don't find a different way, it will become more challenging to mine in this way. And so the effect of that, and this is where you bring the investor community in, is that in the last 15 years, in Chile, copper grades have declined by 30% to get to the 0.5% I'm telling you about now, because the best places have already been mined. Now you're mining harder places, harder to reach, deeper, more energy, more complicated. That means convincing investors to invest in these projects is more challenging. And again, for those that are more financially minded, here's a different way to think about it. In 2010, if you built a new copper project, you were basically spending around $5,000 per ton of copper capacity. That's how much you were paying to get an extra ton of copper out the ground, writ large. I'm talking capex here. Today, that number's 30,000, 6 times as high. And that's because higher energy costs, more complex mining, more complex jurisdictions, all the factors that Mzila has mentioned. So that paints the picture. And that brings us to FPIC, to your point, David. So FPIC obviously stands for Free, Prior, and Informed Consent, and it particularly pertains to indigenous communities. But the same principle can also apply to non-indigenous local communities, where the basic principle is nothing that impacts them should be done without their free, prior, and informed consent. Now, there's a live project in the United States, one of the biggest copper mines in the world, that is currently in a really heated debate around FPIC, and that's called Resolution Copper. It's a huge project that can supply in the millions of tons of copper to the US economy, and it's been stalled for 25 years because the project developers, and that's BHP and Rio Tinto, haven't managed to build an agreement with 11 Native American tribes. There is partial agreement, but there's not yet full agreement. Now, this is where it gets complicated, because what counts as having obtained consent? Does it mean the majority of communities agree? Does it mean that every member of every community agrees? And law is pretty clear on this. It doesn't mean unanimity, but it does mean there is sufficient support and consent. And in places where there is residual opposition, there is an agreed upon process for how that opposition will be managed. Now, the really important thing to keep in mind is this is not a process purely between the company and the community, because it is the state's obligation and responsibility to obtain the free, prior, and informed consent of local and impacted indigenous communities before granting the right to mine. And we're seeing this legislation play through in the US right now, where we're seeing the state dispense its obligations, but in a way that does cause people concern for whether those rights are going to be respected or not. So summary would be, mining has become more complicated, energy intensive, and quite difficult and expensive to do. We're going to need some big technology breakthroughs to change the fundamental model of mining if we are to really make a step change in sustainability of mining. And it's all happening in the context of a much more complicated social environment.
This is the cardiology of geology. We're looking at.
Yeah.
I think that, but the tension is there, right? The demand is so enormous, and the difficulty and the permitting and the challenging and the consent, all these, I do see, and at that conference we were at in the Future Minerals Forum, you could see these tensions almost glossed over to a degree. And again, the complexity of getting this stuff to the marketplace is really challenged. Let's talk a little bit about, if we could, the challenges you both have experienced or overcome. I think we both kind of came into your roles separately on the back of some big fundamental challenges. There was a whole bunch of tailing dams incidents. I think when you took over your CEO-ship, you were kind of dealing with that, and there was a big reimagining of what tailings should happen in the industry. And Mzila, you also came into your role when there was lots of community unrest in South Africa in certain parts, and the challenges and antagonism between communities and some of the industry. Do you want to speak a little bit how those were resolved or your approaches to resolution of those issues?
Happy to, Chris. And just to say that there were three major incidents that happened just before I joined. One was the collapse of a tailings facility, and tailings refers to the waste rock from mining that we've just been talking about, in 2019 in Brumadinho in Brazil, which tragically claimed 272 lives. The second was the destruction of 30,000-year-old Aboriginal caves in Australia, which were legally permitted to be destroyed, but really a terrible decision on the part of the company to have done that. And the third was a report published by Elizabeth Broderick, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women and Girls, showing unacceptable levels of bullying, assaults, and harassment, including sexual assaults at workplaces in the mining industry. And that really was a set of issues that came to the fore as needing urgent attention and action. And in each of those, I'm proud to say, Chris, that we've acted in a way that I hope sets us up not just to not repeat those mistakes again, but to raise the bar for what good performance looks like. On tailings, we now have a global industry standard on tailings management, which all our members certainly are committed to applying, and more of the industry is adopting. That will make tailings safer everywhere. When it comes to the issues on workplace culture and behavior, we established a significantly upgraded set of requirements and commitments when it comes to both physical safety and psychological health and safety, including on inclusion and allowing people to feel welcome at work no matter what their background is. And I think that's moved us along in a huge way. And then when it comes to the respect for traditional owners and their culture, once again, we have significantly upgraded our commitments and narrative around our respect for the rights of Indigenous people, and explicitly acknowledged in that the critical value of cultural heritage and the importance of mines engaging with them on issues of cultural heritage as well as traditional knowledge when it comes to things like nature conservation. So, Chris, of course, I wish none of those things had happened. They caused untold and irreparable harm. But the next best thing that could have happened has happened, which is for the industry to learn from it and to set ourselves up for a much better future.
Terrific. Mzila?
Been quite a lot happening. I mean, I think we've had our own share of incidents of tailings dam failures to different scale. And I think working closely with ICMM, South Africa is going to be the location of the institute that will be, promoting best practice in terms of looking after tailings dams. So, we're responding, and that's important to what Roy is saying, to demonstrate that care and in terms of how we respond. The other issue around community relations is also an important one, and I think, and perhaps I'll talk to both community and employee relations and how it's evolving in South Africa. And starting maybe with employee relations, that's actually evolved in a very positive way. And I think it's largely because structurally what has happened is, the Minerals Council used to be a central bargaining unit on behalf of its members and as employers. But in the past 5, maybe 10 years, that has now that's a role we no longer play. And each employer now actually engages directly with the unions who are represented at their operations. And so there's freedom of association for employees to join any union. And most of the major unions in South Africa are represented to a varying extent at different mine operations. And that has actually built much stronger relationships. And how that has manifested, for instance, has been in the one big issue that often happens between employer and employees. This is wage negotiations. And that has always been a huge area of dispute, where the industry will be characterized by annual labor unrest at the time of wage negotiations. We've hardly seen that happen. And it has been replaced by wage agreements that span a minimum of about 2 years. And the maximum that we've seen has been 5 years with one of our members. And that has provided for a significant amount of stability and predictability when it comes to operations. So now, in fact, mines have to engage with predictability of weather rather than labor unrest. In the same breath, I think there's been a lot of effort invested in building better community relations for similar reasons of harmony between the operation and its community and stability in terms of operating environment. And we're seeing community forums being established. So I think to the extent that a mine can play an important role in organizing or helping a community organize itself for better and more constructive engagement with operations, that bodes well for the operation. And really being transparent in terms of what can be expected in as far as upside sharing, community investment. And we've seen fewer community uprisings as a result. We still get a few in some areas, but it's really been a period in the past 2 to 3 years of stability, both within the operation, between the mine and its employees, as well as between the operations and its community. And when I look ahead, I think, and what's coming, I think there's going to be even more opportunity for those relationships to be improved, because what mining companies are doing are actually, in South Africa, we're having a discussion about how do we have better impact and long-lasting impact on communities. And I think that's going to provide for a dialogue that will see us talk more long-term in terms of over the remaining life of the mine, how can this mine make a significant improvement to this community? And in fact, we'll take it even further to say, what will happen when the mine has stopped operating? And what can we foresee in terms of the livelihood of these communities in these locations?
Terrific. And David or Mark, any additional questions, thoughts?
I think relating to the prior, and you hinted at this very early in the conversation, Ro, there was what can mining adopt in terms of best practices from other industries, and what can mining give to other industries in terms of best practices? So what's that exchange of learning look like? What does your industry need most from others, and what should others be watching and learning from?
Mark, the thing we need more than anything is help to fulfill our solemn duty, which we're currently failing in. And that solemn duty is to make sure that everybody who comes to work goes home safe every day.
Safe.
Just in the 26 companies that are part of ICMM last year, 42 people came to work and didn't go home. It's unacceptable. And it's been a major focus for the industry for a long time. And yes, it's a lot better today than it was in previous years, but it's 42 too many just in the ICMM membership. And Mzila and his group have done incredible leadership in South Africa to also bring those numbers way down, but it's not where we need it to be. And so I think we can learn a ton from how oil and gas treats health and safety. I think they are ahead of the mining industry in how they think about particularly process safety. They're very, very thorough, much more than us. We need to be better. I think we can learn more from aviation on how they share lessons after disasters and the openness with which they share. So safety is the area where I think we need the most help. And I think of sectors like oil and gas and aviation that can help us. Where we can give a bit back, Mark, I would say, let me use a specific example of something that happened last week, which people might really not think could ever have happened, which is we had a meeting of mining leaders with the Pope.
Oh, wow. Yep.
And people are wondering, what's going on here? Why are mining and church leaders meeting? And the reality, which a lot of people don't know, is that's been happening for 10 years. For 10 years, we've had ongoing engagement between mining leaders and faith leaders, currently Christian faith, but the idea is to expand that to other faiths too, as a common exchange of us better understanding our relationship and obligations to society, and for church leaders to understand mining better, because there is still a large portion of the faith community, particularly in Christianity, that has a very negative view of the mining industry based on old scripture. And so this engagement is the most radical and unlikely of collaborations you could ever imagine. It really doesn't, when you first think of it, it makes no sense for these two groups to be meeting. But when you think through the fact that in parts of the world, you may never find a government, you may never find anything else, but you will find a mine and you will find a church.
Find a mine and a church.
So
Exactly.
I guess my invitation from that would be to other sectors to say, what crazy and radical collaborations might you be able to do which you're not currently doing, thinking of miners and church leaders meeting together?
Yeah. I mean, I think the origin of that, I recall, because Mark Cutifani played a big role in enabling this, is that, and we see it in many communities, the church remains the most trusted institution in a lot of mining communities. And as Rose says, mine and a church. I would add a third one, tongue-in-cheek, a bottle store, but that's the story. And interestingly, with these engagements, is that you then are exposed to other resources, which we found and we are hoping to tap into. You can lean on when it comes to this vision of a better social impact of mining. And so it has been a very, very helpful and resourceful relationship that we have established with the Vatican, and in South Africa that has translated into what we call courageous conversations between mining CEOs and the Christian faith and Christian leaders, and it also helps in bridging relationships with other stakeholders, particularly when it comes to industry engaging with government, because at times it can be quite tense. But what we've seen is that, engaging with faith groups, it provides for that opportunity and platform to be able to engage with other stakeholders in difficult situations.
That's a perfect way to end this wonderful conversation. We, ended on a high note, spiritual notes, but really, thank you so much, Ro and Mzila, for the conversation. Thank you for all of the work you're doing. As you've both articulated, we need mining. The world needs more mining. It does drive electrification. It does drive all of the technology innovations that are happening, and also things like security and defense, and it has a massive development potential, and as we can see, nature positive opportunities. So thank you so much. Thanks, David. Mark had to leave early, but if you enjoyed the podcast, please share it. Please give us a rating. And until next time, we greatly appreciate you tuning in.
Thank you very much, Chris, for having us.